endemic sites. And so I'll give you a very quick run through of 80 species from around the Kimberley, just to give you a taste of some of the things we've discovered and some of the more unique species. And so I said acacia was very rich in the Kimberley, but there's some quite unusual species. Excuse me. And this is one of the unusual ones we recently named with Bruce Maslin, with these clubs on these tiny finger-like phyllodes. We named it Acacia claviceta for the club phyllodes. This is another sticky one, and this is actually a mini Ritchie species, so it's got this lovely curling bark, but this is actually a low-growing thing. It's less than 1 metre high and just spreads out across the ground. It's very unusual mini Ritchie with these incredibly sticky pods. Diastomata grows only on these sandstone pavements. It's scattered. It's got a distribution of around 400 kilometres across, but only about 12 known populations, and they can be 100 kilometres apart. And so this is one of the species which gives us a hint that these fire-sensitive species probably were far more widespread before burning became frequent, and now their range has been restricted back to these naturally fire-protected environments. This is a species which was originally collected back in 1905, but the single collection made at that stage just sat in the West Australian Herbarium, identified only as acacious, but until very recently we were able to go back and recollect it near the original location. Interestingly enough, actually on the station where I grew up, but in the far back corner in a spot I'd never managed to get to, and we went in by helicopter. Another recently named species, Acacia Mckenzie Eye. This is a rare species, so the location's generalised on the databases, so it shows up as 2 dots, but it's actually a single population and a gorge about 200 metres long. So it really is a small population just north of Lake Argyll, but so close to Kununurra. Again, there's so many of these species are poorly known and very localised. Acacia obtriangularis, only known for one pavement, the Lawley River, up near the Mitchell Plateau. Again, highly localised and had to go in by helicopter. And so in acacia, we're currently at approaching 160 species in the Kimberley. We actually suspect there's probably at least 200 species in the Kimberley, because in this North Kimberley sandstones, we get a total turnover of acacia species on the scale of about 20 to 30 kilometres. And there's these big gaps where we've just done no collecting. And so we think there could easily be another 40 wattles still to be found in Kimberley. And they're the large conspicuous elements in the landscape. So that just gives you a sense of how poorly known the plant flora is. This is another very unusual species, known just near Mount Trafalgar, again, a single site. We brought it down to Bruce Maslin. He took one look at it and said, well, I know it's new and I have absolutely no idea what it's related to. And we still have no idea what it's related to. Very unusual features. The phyllodes suggest it's related to a desert species. The pod suggests it's related to a tropical group. We just don't know. Yeah, Bruce actually questioned whether the pods came off the tree, but they definitely did. Another unusual species related to a thing from the Victoria River in the NT. And then there's a large diversity of peas. This top one's a new pea named off sand dunes in the edge of the Great Sandy Desert, related to a thing from swamps near Broome. Aquatic Plants is an unnamed aquatic, the plant name for Surrey Jacobs, only known for a few populations in just these small ephemeral streams that really only flow for a couple of months a year. So you really have to be there in the wet season or you'd never know it was there. This is a recently named new genus for Australia, Areocleome, formerly in Cleome, endemic to northern Australia, quite an interesting species. And this species was missing, the Auranticarpa resinosa in the Phytospiraceae was missing for 180 years. It was collected by Alan Cunningham on the King expedition, only known for a fruiting specimen like the one on the bottom right. And then no one could find it. And eventually 180 years later, we found a juvenile on the left, which we actually thought initially could have been a grevillea until we smelt it. It smells like turpentine. It's like, well, that's clear, it can't be a grevillea, but the leaves are very grevillea-like. And then we speculated, well, maybe these are the juvenile leaves of this missing Phytosporum or Auranticarpa. Eventually, we looked around and found some sterile plants. It took us another 5 years to find those plants in fruit, and 10 years from when we rediscovered it to actually find in flower for the very first time, and we've only ever seen in flower in one season. It flowers for quite a short period of time. It's the only time flowers have ever been recorded on this species. We've now got about 10 populations, but only about 200 individuals. So this is, again, one of the species which seems to be very, very, very fire sensitive. It can re-sprout, but it takes a very long time to maturity. It's probably 15 to 20 years to maturity. Hence, flowering fruiting is very rare and only in these really fire-protected landscapes. Another very unusual species which we never expect to turn up in the Kimberley is Backhausia, the lemon myrtles. Gary Sankowski from North Queensland was hiking through this bit of rainforest, you can see down the bottom here, and found a sterile plant that he thought looked like a Backhausia. And over the next, I think it took us 8 years to go back and actually eventually find in flower and confirm that indeed, yes, it wasn't a Backhausia. And eventually a couple of other small populations turned up. Was named as a new species endemic to this area. But the disjunction, by using molecular data, has been estimated that it could have been separated from the North Queensland population for as long as 4.5 million years. Excuse me a moment, I'm just going to have to help out. That's all right, Felix is going to come and join us. Felix, darling, you come with Daddy? Sit. Felix, sit down for a moment. Thank you. Sorry, someone's waking up again. So I guess other groups which you might be familiar with, the Boronia. So this is a rare cliff Boronia. Cliff Boronias were known for the Kakadu escarpment, and where there's quite a diversity of them. And the cliff face are very prevalent in the Kimberley. And so for many, many years, we wondered, well, where are the cliff face Boronias in the Kimberley? And eventually we did find one. So far we only know one cliff dwelling species, but it's very localized. Distribution is about 3 kilometers. So we expect there probably still are more of those out there, but there's quite a high diversity of Boronia species in the area. This is Boronia enteric, only known for the Prince Regent. Boronia marcoana, only known for the Lawley River. Boronia Thede, only known for Theda Station. And some of you will know Alania from the Blue Mountains and some of the caves and cliff face around there in Western Australia and a few places scattered around in New South. I think the Grampians and a few of the granite rocks in Queensland are these boreas, far more common in the granites of the southwest. But the Kimberley actually has two endemic boreal species. For a while it was thought it shared one with Kakadu as well, but that turns out to be a Kakadu endemic. And this is one I discovered when I just finished high school on our station. We only recently named this as Borea stenophylla, still only known for a single population on the Sinnet Range. And these are remarkable resurrection species. We're still finding quite large peas, named a couple of bossias recently, and these wingless, leafless bossias are quite similar and quite closely related to some of the leafless bossias in the Sydney region. If you look at the photo on the top right, as seedlings they do have true leaves, but they very quickly wither. So it's a second species in that group related to Bosioides. Kimberley actually has a number of geophytic orchids, and a number of those are also endemic and unnamed. So there's a few phrase name taxa here which are currently writing up. Aravella, formerly Cleome, was also very rich. Just finishing up a study on that, we have discovered 17 new species in the northwest of Australia at least. And these are just a couple of the more spectacular examples from the Kimberley, and unnamed species on the left, and Kimberley Eye on the right. And a little Commelina, that's another group which is very poorly understood in Australia. It's a tiny species only known for this single pavement in these little rock hollows. So we've only ever seen about 20 plants of this species. Cocorus, that I discovered a few years ago, we're only known from a single population in the Drossa River National Park. It grows on these laterite pans. And this unusual corymbia, again near the Argyle diamond mine, with incredible coloration that shifts on an individual plant, where all colour either goes into the base of the stamens or into the hypanthium, to give either these rich red or these suffused pinks on individuals that are one or the other just scattered across these hillsides. Distribution's about 15 kilometres long and about half a kilometre wide, just following the crest of this ironstone ridge. It's quite amazing. Oops. And we've got a surprising number of geophytes also in the Kimberley. This is a sand lily, or crinum, we recently named, known for scattered populations across the northwest Kimberley. We've got 2 dipodiums in the Kimberley, both probably endemic, though there is another dipodium in the Victoria River area. It's too poorly known to know whether it's a Kimberley species or a separate species. So there's one on sandstone and one on basalt. The Kimberley is very, very rich in Drossa. I think we're now at about 24 species of Drossa in the Kimberley, and there's still more that we're investigating. And so it really is remarkably rich, particularly in the group that was formerly included in Drossa indica. We have 2 examples here. Lots and lots of grasses, and a lot of the grasses are quite highly localized, particularly Ariacnes and Trodias and the like. The more we look at them, the more we're finding localized endemics. Eriocolon, those tiny little aquatics that grow in these very ephemeral pools, are also very rich in the Kimberley. A very large percentage of Australia's Eriocolon diversity is found on these sandstone habitats. This is another unusual species we named a few years ago with Greg Leach, that only grows in these very short-lived ephemeral pools in very, very fresh water. But again, the water's only there for a couple of months. And just some of the more unusual things we come across, this is a fungus that call either the tennis ball fungus or the snot ball fungus. It's about the size of a tennis ball, and it's incredibly gelatinous inside. So as it decomposes, it just looks like this massive ball of snot. This is a very interesting species because it's only a 2nd record for Australia. We found it down the bottom of this gorge in the rainforest. The other record for Australia was in, I think it's the Daintree rainforest in North Queensland. And from there it jumps to the rainforest of Malaysia. So it's a true rainforest species, but it's down in the bottom of this gorge, which only receives 3 months of rainfall. So that's where we're happy to define that as a true rainforest, because it's essentially seepage fed. So it's got year-round water source that's not specifically rainfall. In the soybean group, this glycine is known for a single population about 50 metres across. We've only ever found a single flower on it. It's quite remarkable, and it's very unusual. It's the only species in the genus that has solitary leaflets. I talked about the islands earlier. This is a Gomphrena Splendida that we recently named. It's a massive perennial species. There's giant flower heads up to 5 centimetres across. A lot of horticultural potential. It's frost sensitive, unfortunately. We grew it at Kings Park for a number of years, and then eventually had a severe frost that took it out. But a lot of interest there. Now this is a tiny, tiny goodenia. This is the smallest goodenia flower in the world, Gomphrena Splendida. You can see my thumbnail there for scale. All the plants are tiny, but the flower is only a couple of millimetres across. Another species which only occurs up on those islands that grows in beach sands, the Gomphrena Maritense, only endemic to the Marit Island group, related to a species from the Pilbara of all things. Gruia pandanica is a species I named recently. And a second species, Gruia savannicola, which was previously confused with species from Myanmar. And so this one got some media attention recently when I named it, because the common name for this species is dog's balls. And so you can see there the fruit with the quite stiff hairs, it's where it gets its common name from. Excuse one moment. Felix can make another cameo. Hey, darling. Okay, say good night to everyone. Night, night. Night, night. Oopsie. Sorry. Sorry, Felix. Sorry, Felix. Sorry, Felix. Skip through these. I mentioned earlier that there's quite a few geophytes in the Kimberley. Those of you who go out in summer, you've probably seen some of the hemidorums around the sandstones of Sydney. And it turns out that there's always known to be a few hemidorums in the Kimberley. Once we got in and looked further, we found quite a few new species, and actually turns out the Kimberley has the highest area of hemidorum diversity or anywhere. It's higher than even the southwest, which was thought to be the centre of diversity for the genus. So we've got at least 15 species in the Kimberley, and there's probably actually more. A number of those are known for very localised areas. You have to be there at exactly the right time to catch them in flower. And so we suspect there's at least another 5 species we just don't have good enough material of yet. And there may well be more that we're yet to collect. So this is a species we recently named that occurs just out from Broome, but just people weren't there at the right time to collect it. This is still only known for 2 collections, made 15 years apart by us in the Prince Regent. And this is known for a single plant, which I actually dug up, digging up a pea, and then we managed to grow it on and flower it back in Perth. I recognised from the base as a hemidorum, but the leaf shape was unique, so we knew it was a new species, but we were able to get it to flower in a pot at Kings Park and name it from that specimen. The species only known from the Prince Regent again, only known for Theta Station. And then this remarkable hibiscus from Theta Station. The habitat photo you can see here shows a sandstone pavement that's about 1 kilometre long, a few hundred metres wide, and that is the only spot this hibiscus is known, despite the fact that it's 2.5 metres high. You can spot it from a helicopter. These massive yellow flowers, 15 centimetres across. They stand out like anything, and these pale bluish glaucous leaves. It's incredible species, but incredibly highly localised. This is another species formerly in Hybanthus, now Afro-Hybanthus, known for a couple of locations on these sandstone pavements. Hypoxus, this is actually a true Hypoxus. A lot of the southeastern species have recently been transferred to Pararidia, a genus shared with South Africa. This is a true Hypoxus, which is Northern Australia and Asia. And we've got a couple of species there. One of them grows on the sand flats, and one of them grows only under rock overhangs. And they're very markedly different in their seeds. It's a large shrubby Ipomea that turned up, only known for a single location on top of the Napier Range and the Devonian limestone. Its closest relative grows on limestone on the Cape Range, about 1,500 kilometres away. Leschenoltius, or the wreath flower genus, we've got quite a diversity across Northern Australia, and some of the best features there are the seed morphology. And we recently described this a new species as Leschenoltium mimica, which is mimicking this other herb here, Lindernia, which grows with, and you can see the common Leschenoltia species on the bottom right there has these much larger showy flowers, and you can see the number of ways it's reduced its size, it's reduced its orientation, it's changed its coloration to really mimic this Lindernia and presumably sharing pollinator, but another highly localized species. And another bizarre Lindernia grows on the underside of rock overhangs near Kununurra, Lindernia cleistandra. It sticks its flowers out for pollination, and then once it's been pollinated, it sticks its flowering stalk back against the rock and pushes its fruit hard up against the rock. So any rainfall and water hopefully washes the seeds down into another crack on the rock face to keep its seeds on the rock face. There's an unusual Lamandra acicularis recently named, and a resurrection grass or Macrera that we still haven't named yet. We plan to name for Ian Cowrie from the NT Herbarium, who first found it, only known for a few locations north of the Bungle Bungle and one location in the Bungles. A large Mitra sacme, there's a couple of species get to the Sydney area. The Kimberley is again one very high diversity for Mitra sacme. Unusual Myriophyllum, these only grow in these tiny rock pools. Often the rock pools are only 1 metre across, 20 centimetres deep. They've only got water in them for a couple of months a year. The likelihood of dispersal between an individual rock pile We did some genetic work and found out the probability of it dispersing 20 metres from neighbouring rock pools is no higher than the odds of it dispersing 100 kilometres. So it's a very random chance event that birds actually land in one of these rock holes and disperse the plants. Little water snowflake, Nymphoides astenae, again, only a couple of these very shallow, very ephemeral rock pools on the Mitchell Plateau. Pandanus is a group we're still trying to understand. In the Kimberley, there's a huge range of variation in the fruit form, but next to no variation in the plants. And we don't know whether that means we've got cryptic species where the plants aren't very distinct and we need to recognise them based on their fruit form, or whether they're incredibly variable in their fruit form and they are just one species. At the moment, the different fruit forms are recognised as variety rank, but everyone debates back and forth whether they should just be considered one variable thing or whether there are lots of species there, and we just don't know at this point. This recently named Philanthus grows on the desert sands in the southern Kimberley, but we're still naming new trees. We're still naming new eucalypts and new wattles, and this is a Planconia in the Brazil nut family. This was one of the earliest species I named. Excuse me, a species I discovered while I was in high school, and the leaves get stripped by these processionary caterpillars that form these massive bags, silken bags, and the fruit's very tasty on this as well. Another species which might be known from cultivation, Pyrophes amboinensis, is quite popular in tropical gardens, and for a long time was considered to occur in the Kimberley along with Pyrophes alba. And when we revisited the population, it turns out that we get narrow leaves and broad paddle leaves alternately in the mixed population. There is only actually one species there, and it's neither amboinensis nor alba. It's actually a Kimberley endemic species, Pyrophes, known only for a handful of populations on the Mitchell Plateau. This is Cynostemon in the Phyllanthacea. There's quite a lot of Cynostemon species, and Ian Telford has been getting to the bottom of these and naming some of these recently. There's a lot of small annual herbaceous things which are poorly known that turn up in these little sandstone pavements in particular. And this species here, we recently named a Schenas Kimberliensis, tiny little annual, and that photo shows the entire known extent of its distribution. A single little patch on this single sandstone pavement. I talked about bush tomatoes and the diversity there. This is Solanum, which first found just in leaf, and was just dropped in by helicopter to the spot and told there's a group of people under the rock over there. I was dropped off to talk to them about the plants, and so on the way, just walking over to them, I found this species and thought, oh, I've never seen a leaf like that before in a Solanum. I think this is probably new. And it wasn't until 4 years later that I was able to actually get back there, and there'd been a late cyclone which had kept the flowering season going, so I got in there while it was still flowering because it had finished the first time. I was actually able to confirm that yes, it was a new species, and so I ended up naming that species for someone I met when I first got dropped off there by helicopter, and that person's shown there on the bottom right. That's Zoe Davies, who's now my wife. As it turned out, I found my wife under a rock in the middle of the Kimberley. So another species here that grows out on the Barrett Islands is Spermacos thinicola, still a manuscript name, only grows on these beach dunes on a couple of the islands in the Barrett Island group. Starlitium is also very well represented. So this is Lydium Latrodectum, Latrodectum being the genus name for the redback spider that exists of the redback trigger plant. There's another new species that turned up just near Broome. So this is only just the turn off the main road just out of Broome. Starlitium pandanicum. And this one was quite remarkable. It grows under rock overhangs in the North Kimberley. If you're familiar with the genus St. Paulia, the resemblance is quite uncanny when you get a good bunch of it growing together. And Starlitium Willingi, again, it only grows around the edges of these sandstone pavements, named for Tim Willing from the Broome Botanical Society. Another remarkable small tree, very common, grows in street blocks around Broome, common in its area, and extends down the 80-mile beach. Turns out that this was actually unnamed. It was confused with a species from the North Kimberley, terminally Cunninghamii. This is quite remarkable because it's an incredibly important bush food for the Aboriginal people in the area, and they're actually growing it in plantations. And they had plantations of this established before we figured out it wasn't even named. And so we used the local name, Kumpaja, as the species name for this. And so these fruits are incredibly rich. They can be 5 to 6 centimetres across, and both the flesh of the fruit is very rich in vitamin C and other nutrients, and the seed is like an almond, so they call it bush almond. And so both the flesh of the fruit and also the seeds are a very important food source. It's interesting. I've got this divaricate branching, which is actually a feature that's associated with large rat-like birds. So things related to emus, but things like moa. So they're very common in the New Zealand flora, and they're also found in the South African flora, and they're a defence against herbivory. So the question is, why has this species got this particular growth form? What was it protecting itself against? Presumably something now extinct. I mentioned the little Schenas before. It's on the pavement. You turn around from where you're looking at the Schenas, and there's this little, sorry, not triumphata, it's a typo, Trachymene. On the same pavement, these two species grow 30 metres apart, but still single population for each on this pavement, and this is the same pavement where that hibiscus is. So I think we've got at least 7 species known for only this single sandstone pavement, less than a kilometre long. And this is a Tribulus in the Zygophalaceae, turned up again just near Broome and near Port Hedland, a couple of populations, but it's wet season flowering, and so it just wasn't collecting flower for people to recognise. When I first found it, I thought it was a Zygophyllum because of the leaf form, but it turns out it's a Tribulopus. Also talked about Trodia, the spinifex. It turns out the Kimberley is the centre of diversity for Trodia, and there's probably 70 Trodia species in the Kimberley alone. There's huge diversity there that's yet unnamed. This species is named barbata or bearded for the profusion of hairs all over it. This species is actually named in honour for Surrey Jacobs, for those who knew him for his profuse beard. And Trodia was the topic of Surrey Jacobs' PhD study, so some lovely links there with Surrey. And the Trodia celsa, only known for the summit of Mount Trafalgar, so very, very restricted in habitat. This is another species, grows right beside the highway south of Kununurra, Trodia fissura, but it's the smallest of all the Trodias. The leaves are only about 4 centimetres long. It just forms these tiny cushions on the rock faces. And Triumphata Kenealii, named for Kevin Keneally, who's the person who worked at West Australian Herbarium for many years, spent his career there, and he's the person who actually got me interested in botany in the first place, when I was, actually met him when I was in primary school. And this is the first species we both discovered and named, Typhonium peltandroides, named with Alastair Hay, now retired from the Sydney Botanic Garden. And so this is a species, until quite recently, only known for a single population on the station we grew up in. We have recently found it a bit further north in the Prince Regent, but still actually only the 2 populations known. And these are a couple of new Typhoniums, or stink lilies, also called dead horse lilies, for the aroma emitted from the mature flowers, only known for the black soil flats around Kununurra, both quite rare and highly threatened by the development of the Ord River scheme. Another unusual species, Koya, in the Lamiaceae. This species needs to be transferred into Koya. It was originally named as Pterodia, only known for a couple of spots, very fire sensitive. And I've only ever seen about 5 individuals of this species. And it again grows up on these rock faces. And so that's an overview of 80 species. Just gives you just a small taste of the diversity of Kimberley and Kimberley landscapes. There's many, many lifetimes to be spent understanding these landscapes and the huge diversity. A lot of the research papers are published open access, and as many as possible are loaded on my website, theplantpress.com. And so if you're interested in the research itself, there's a full list of publications, and a lot of them you can link directly to the paper through that website. So thanks very much for your time. Apologies